All right. Sam, good? Can you guys hear me? Good? All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us here today. So let me just start out with our presentation. How many of you guys like those Surface devices you got last night? Pretty good? Pretty good? It's good stuff. We're pretty excited about that. So I just want to do a quick bit of developer market research here. When you guys opened those boxes last night, how many of you spent more time downloading and consuming apps? Sure. Okay, scattered hands. I'm going to guess like 5%. How many of you spent more time in a web browser like IE10? Oh, a few more hands. Looks like that's about 2/3 to 1/3 of those who raised your hand. So that's the title of this talk, is just kind of giving some insight into that. So we're going to talk about lighting up in Windows, really bridging the world from websites, and talk about the web ecosystem to also the opportunity with apps. I'm Justin. I'm a product manager on the IE team. And Jean has joined me on the BizDev team as well with the lovely kitty hat as well. Go, Jean.
Cat hat, to be
cat hat. All right. So really we're going to focus on three things today, if I can click that properly. First of all, we're going to talk about what's possible in IE10. And I think most of you guys have already had a chance to try out the Touch browser. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the developer opportunity there and really the progression towards Touch. We're going to spend the majority of the time on cross-browser tips in IE. And we realize that it is still difficult to support many modern browsers as well as support outdated and older versions of IE. It's something that we feel the pain as much as you guys do at Microsoft. And to that extent, it's our goal to help you support those versions as much as possible. And then finally, Jean's going to talk about today 4 ways to light up in Windows 8. And really, the majority, like I say, is the focus on cross-browser coding. But in all 4 of these cases, you can use between 1 and 3 lines of code to just make your site get a little bit closer to your users on the Windows 8 start screen, through touch, through some of intuitive navigation as well. So very, very simple tips and tricks there. So let's pause and look at IE10 and kind of where we are in the state of the ecosystem. For developers, really IE10 represents a lot more of a focus on HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. And if you look at IE9, that was kind of Microsoft's initial entry and reintroduction into the web standards world. But IE10 is really that tipping point where you should feel pretty excited, I think, to be able to support Chrome, Firefox, Opera, and IE 9 and 10 as a modern browser set, and then consider IE 8 and 7 separately to that. The developer tools are certainly something we've made incremental improvement on with IE10. Yes, you can only access them in the desktop experience, but when you think about testing performance and networks connectivity, and then also rendering to legacy versions of IE, it's just much, much easier to be able to do that where we used to have to usually download third-party tools. But the real thing I want to talk to you, I think, when you look at IE10 is this thing in Touch. And Touch, I think to really pay off Touch and you look at apps, the best way to look at it is 3 years ago, the browser business changed to focus more and more on fast. And that if you got a fast browser and that you optimized your sites for speed, users would have a good experience. So I just want to paint the idea in your head that Touch is the new fast, and that users can have a better experience in Touch on a browser, and that Touch itself blurs that line between the app ecosystem as well as the web. Ask yourself, some of the things I'll show you here today, would your average user really be able to make a difference between a website experience and an app experience? Or is really that just a logical distinction that we developers make in order to be able to target a particular platform? So it's just food for thought there. Touch is something that we think of as all-in for web standards. We've submitted our pointers APIs to the W3C, and we stand very genuinely through that process to bring this to all of the modern browsers as well. So I think to look at cross-browsers and kind of paint the picture of where we began, IE9 was really an initial entry in web standards for us, again, in the modern browser era. And we based a lot of that on what are the technologies that developers use the most, the semantic elements, Canvas, SVG. What are those things that they likely to adopt first as we're progressing towards a full web experience with cross-browser? And so we invested heavily in the semantic elements in video and audio, and really tried to introduce this idea with hardware acceleration, the underlying GPU performance that could be powered through a browser. But as great as IE9 is, and I think it got a good reintroduction, especially for developers, to the modern browser, IE10 has so much more. And I would challenge you guys to look at that. At this point, we're at the tipping point where you can feel confident to go cross-browser very easily and include IE10 and 9 in that modern browser set and serve the older experiences to 8 and 7. Look at, for example, File API, and WebSockets is a particularly interesting one. Because during the IE9 timeframe, WebSockets was continually being experimented with. It was stabilizing. And during the IE10 timeframe, we felt confident through standards bodies to go ahead and ship that. That WebSockets gives you the bidirectional communication, which we'll show you in a demo here later as well. So just a lot of good stuff that you can confidently write more and more cross-browser code. So I also want to make a couple comments on the web ecosystem itself. These are things that I think are less talked about or less prevalent that I see in media and on TechCrunch and Gizmodo and in some of the other developer sites. So you raised your hands earlier about what you did on a web browser and what you did on apps, and I saw about 2/3 on the browser side. So our telemetry on Windows 8 right now is telling us that about 55% of the time that users are spending is in the browser itself. So we've got about 10,000 apps in the marketplace. We certainly don't have as many as iOS at this point. But even if you survey iPad developers and iPad users, the telemetry still sits at about 40 to 45% of a time in an iPad is spent in the browser. And that's with a marketplace of over 500,000 apps. So in the foreseeable future, the web is going to continue to be a place to reach a large number of users. And so I kind of challenge the notion that the web is where you reach the most number of users, but you can also use these same technologies to deliver richer and richer experiences where you make more money through apps as well. So it's an interesting notion. Windows 7 is an even higher percentage on time on site as well. Finally, the last point on the ecosystem I want to make is that really we are progressing towards a mobile web experience, whether that be on a tablet, whether it be in your smartphone. The amount of devices that will ship in the next 3 to 5 years that are mobile is many orders of magnitude higher than fixed state devices. So as you're thinking about writing code for your latest site, definitely consider this and consider the frameworks and libraries that will allow you to more quickly build a mobile experience. About 12% of the browser global internet traffic is in mobile right now. So certainly this is something that's just going to continue to grow more and more.
Show us some demos.
Demos? What was that?
Demos.
All right, so I've spent a lot of time on slide. Who is that out there who asked for more demos?
It's Grant Skinner.
Grant, why don't you come up here? I've talked enough, right? Why don't you show him something cool?
How convenient that I happen to have a microphone on. Session drama. It's so much fun. All right. Let me just swap over here, and I will continue to pretend that I am just a random guy that walked on stage. So, Justin yesterday, so this is a little bit going to be a little bit of an improv show, but Justin yesterday asked me to jump on stage and walk through our experience a little bit with building the Atari Arcade. The Atari Arcade is a totally online experience. We developed this with Microsoft and Atari, obviously. And really exciting project for us. We got to build a engaging online arcade experience. We got to take 8 of Atari's classic arcade games and sort of reimagine them with a web focus. So what we really wanted to do was preserve the soul of these games, but sort of enhance the flesh and take advantage of modern web standards. So that meant coming up with better graphics, sort of improving the interaction for modern interaction models, and also doing some multi-user stuff. So actually using WebSockets, which I know Justin was just talking about. And so there's really kind of two main parts to this project. There was the site and there was the games. And they both kind of used different technologies and both had their own challenges, but they had to work together. So on the site side, we came up with this kind of interesting interaction using CSS 3D and used a number of different libraries. We leveraged Modernizer to do feature detection, right, so that we could decide which browsers we're going to be able to play these games. We used Underscore and we used Backbone extensively, and we used those for deep linking as well as templating. And this is really critical for us because we had a very short timeline to deliver this, and so we really had to figure out how to work in parallel, have multiple teams working on the same project, and we were able to use templating to modularize the site so that we could have people working on discrete pieces of the site without treading on each other's toes. We ran into a few challenges around this. We really wanted to use CSS 3D. It was a new feature in IE10. It's something that we've been playing around with a lot in different browsers. And we came up with this cool interface, but we realized partway through that IE10 currently doesn't support Preserve 3D, which is a feature in CSS 3D that lets you basically create individual models and move them around. So you can basically group a bunch of surfaces together, put them into a div, and then move the div around in 3D space and preserve the 3D nature of the child elements. And that's currently not supported in IE10. So we wound up writing a class, which we haven't open sourced yet, but I'm going to open source it soon, which is unimaginatively named CSS 3D. And it basically let us work with a lot of matrix math to get the same kind of results, the same kind of nested behavior inside of IE10, and then leverage Preserve 3D on other browsers where it was supported. I think the more exciting part of this project was, of course, the games, right? We wound up building 8 games, 5 of which have multiplayer capabilities. And to build these games, and part of the reason that Microsoft approached us around these was that we had built these libraries called Create.js. So it's actually 4 libraries.
Keep talking.
Yeah, so it's actually a suite of 4 libraries. It's Easel.js, which does 2D graphics, generally on top of Canvas. Sound.js, which abstracts a lot of the difficulties in working with audio on the web, which is still an area that has a lot of room for improvement. Tween.js, which allows us to do tweened animations, and Preload.js, which actually leverages XML HTTP request level 2 and does progress-based loading and makes it really easy to pull your assets in and manage those assets. There were sort of a couple of core challenges that we had building these games. Sort of interaction and performance, I think, were 2 of the biggest pieces. And so on the interaction front, Microsoft kept talking to us about touch first, right? Touch first this and touch first that. And honestly, coming into the project, I just kind of thought it was like this big marketing spiel thing that Justin was throwing at me. And I was like, yeah, touch first, whatever. But as we proceeded with the project, we realized that it was actually a really good mantra when we were building these experiences. And part of that is that, as developers, we're really familiar with the desktop metaphor, right? We're really familiar with how experiences should work with the mouse and the keyboard. And so it's easy to build those experiences. But touch is new, and it takes a lot more thinking. And so we really had to think about touch first when we were building these games, get it right, and then implement keyboard and mouse, because it was much easier to retrofit that functionality than it would have been to retrofit touch. And we kind of identified in these games 3 different models. So we have We have games like Missile Command, which Justin was just playing, which is basically just direct touch. It's just click wherever you want to shoot a missile. That was really straightforward. We have a follow model, so think games like Pong, where it basically tracks your finger and the paddle will follow your finger. And then for some games, we really wanted that retro experience of the joystick, and so we created virtual joysticks. And we actually wound up upgrading Easel.js to support multi-touch on both iOS and on Windows devices. And so we were able to do multi-touch joysticks. And we've actually released that as part of the Atari SDK. So if you're building this type of content, you can actually go to the Dev Center for Atari and get that code for free. Another little challenge that we ran into was we really needed to be able to safely dispose of these games once they'd been loaded. And so we'd load them into an iframe. And that worked great because it let us purge the games and not worry about library conflicts and stuff like that. But it introduced a challenge for interaction where we'd lose touch events as people left the iframe. And we were able to deal with that by building a really simple proxy class that would just take all of the touch events from the shell and push them through with a little bit of translation into the iframe, so we'd still get all of the keyboard events, all of the touch events, and all of the mouse events, and that worked out really well. We're continuing to do more updates on the interaction around these games. If you head out and over to the code, what is it called?
Coding for Fun.
Code for Fun room, you can actually play with these games on a arcade cabinet, which we didn't really know until right near the end. So it's yet another interaction model that we had to support. And we're starting to do a lot of work around making these games really playable on smaller form factors like phones. And that kind of introduces its own concerns. The other big challenge that we faced with these games was performance. And we've done 4 or 5 projects like this building 2D games in HTML5. So we knew a lot of the performance concerns around the main game construction, but we had this big site around it. And what we found was that actually the site around the games had a much bigger impact on our performance than the work we were doing on the games themselves. Things like glows and overlapping shadows and the Z order of the game versus the site itself had a massive impact on the performance of our games. In fact, things like that would gain us, double the frame rate, making changes to the site itself versus little incremental changes that we'd find, tweaking the game engines or changing how we were rendering things in game. The other thing that we did to make these games perform really well is we did frame rate monitoring. So we actually, both on the site and in the games, we're constantly monitoring the frame rate of the experience. And if it either drops consistently or if we see an ongoing pattern of little dropouts, which is something that you'll see with in certain browsers with the garbage collector, then on the site we'll recommend that the user drops down into a 2D view. Which basically just looks like that, but is much less performant or much less CPU bound. And in the games, what we do is we generally target 60 frames per second, but if the user starts getting hiccups, we'll actually drop them down to 30 frames per second seamlessly without telling them about it. And we'll go into a low profile mode where the gameplay and most of the graphics are identical, but we get rid of some of the particle effects and things like that have a cost but don't actually affect how the game is played. We found that this was really effective. And we don't bother remembering that setting. Every time someone enters a game, they always enter in high profile, and then we drop them to low profile just based on the performance of the game. And that way, if you're watching a bunch of YouTube videos the first time you play a game, we don't pigeonhole you into like a less fluid experience. We let you come back and play again and always start out with the higher level experience. So, overall, this is like a really fantastic project. I mean, I'm a huge Atari fan, so it was like a great experience to get to like come in and rebuild these games. Atari has actually opened up a developer center around it that teaches you how to build these types of experiences, and they actually have a model around letting developers like you guys actually submit games into them and share in monetization. So I would definitely recommend checking it out and playing around with some of this tech.
Thank you, Grant.
Thanks, Justin.
All right. Okay, so we'll jump back here real quick. Okay, so a lot of the things that Grant did with Atari Arcade are quite applicable to kind of some of the sites that you build for on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't really matter whether you're an HTML5 game developer or if you're building the local line of business application for Boeing, if you will. But there's some commonalities that we were able to kind of detect with a project like Atari Arcade on what are the easiest ways to support modern browsers, including IE 10, but also what are some of those things that developers commonly run into problems. We see that on Stack Overflow and Q&A, and what are some of the things that hold them back from being able to serve all those modern experiences as well. So one of the key themes here is that we were able to write cross-browser code. There is nothing inside Atari Arcade that cannot be performed in a Chrome or a Firefox, with the exception of touch. But that's something that we're working on with the W3C and standards body. And so this is something you can go to Chrome, you can go to Firefox, and the code works reliably in those browsers the same. Which is really kind of a key theme of one of the most simple ways that you can do that is just to declare a standards-based doc type. This might seem really, really obvious to some people in the room, but I have access to a crawler, and I regularly work with partners. And we're sitting right now, about 6 months ago, about 50% of the top 5,000 traffic and influential websites are using a standards-based doc mode. With IE 10, we've seen that kind of reach a tipping point where now that number is up to about 88%, and the remaining ones are generally handled through us guessing whether the browser needs to be in standards mode or not through interoperability Quarks mode. My whole point here, though, is that you can confidently begin to write that sort of cross-browser code that works well using a singular doc type. And I just encourage you to type that in, test it, see what breaks in your site in IE 8 and 6, and then we have new tools like Compat Inspector that allow you to fix those things more quickly. Grant talked to you about HTML5 and CSS3. I won't belabor that point further. The thing I really want to focus on is feature detection. And over the past 6 months, we've spent a ton of time with frameworks and libraries, vendors, jQuery, jQuery Mobile, UI, Dojo, MooTools, Modernizer. All of these frameworks, we have worked really, really hard to get ready for IE 10 so that you don't have to worry about that as well. So we highly recommend you use Modernizer. I think as you see many different devices that are out there in the ecosystem, being able to do feature detection is increasingly going to save you a lot of time, even if it's kind of a small pain initially. So I talked a little bit about Compat Inspector. The key thing I kind of want to reinforce here is that this is a JS library that you can connect with Fiddler. It's going to intercept the code that you're writing and detect if you're using a non-standard or a deprecated feature that's still available in IE 8 or 7. It's just one ways. We know we can't take away the pain of 8 and 7 completely from developers, but it's just one way that we can make it a little bit easier as we're auto-upgrading and progressing developers and users, towards 10 and 9. One of the key things here that we saw, and this again comes to the point of hardware acceleration, is that on about 50 top partner sites, we saw on average about a 30% better page load performance. So there really is a measurable difference when you serve that modern markup to your users in IE. Certainly on a device like Surface RT, where the hardware is based on ARM, that difference in performance is going to be key to your users having a good experience. There's been a lot talked about going plug-in free. Many of you might have heard about the Flash CV list that we rolled out for the release preview as well. The key point I just want to reinforce here is that the web is progressing more and more towards a set of plug-in-free experiences. We, Microsoft, we're all in on that. We're absolutely committed to that, to the point where we want to make it a little easier for you by Flash CV listing some of your experiences now, so it's not just a complete break situation for your users. So it's a very simple process. You can also implement a meta tag that allows you to switch to the desktop. That tends to be a little bit more of a commercial or enterprise scenario. We don't recommend that as much for consumers. But YouTube does a pretty good job at this by detecting HTML5 first. That way they can serve it to an iPad experience or an IE10 experience, and then they fall back gracefully to Flash based on that. So I want to show you a little bit example of just a great site that was built that's plug-in free. I'll move this over to your window here. This is Pulse.me. This is a really, really popular iPad app that we have brought to the modern browser using HTML5 technologies and a new JavaScript library called Tiles.js. And I'll just kind of show you what I mean by this. This is a site that's responsively designed, so I log in, choose my news preferences. Let's see if I can trigger that. There we go. Where the tiles just rearrange themselves right in my browser. Doesn't matter if I'm down to a mobile browser side. It's going to change those tiles very, very quickly. And then let's say, I'm interested in technology, but I really want to specifically drill into The Verge. I'm personally a big fan of The Verge. So here are all the articles that The Verge has written today, just tiled, very visually presented to you in a web browser. Like I say again, our motto here is this works reliably in all of the modern browsers, including IE10. And it's just a very clean experience. And if you think about what you can apply to this, you're not a developer of news, but say you're a line of business app developing in an intranet. This is a very easy way to prepare and visually help with business intelligence analytics and all sorts of different things as well. Tiles.js is the framework that we built for this project as well. So I'll move that window back. And then the final point I want to make is being device independent. And you guys having your Surface RTs is probably a good indicator of this. But the amount of form factors that are out there, not only that are PCs, but also are new Internet Explorer on the Xbox, which is in front of 60 million users, all the way to Windows Phone 8. There's going to be so many devices over the next 3 to 5 years for you guys to target. I would declare at this point that it's time to reevaluate what you think with responsive web design. It's been something that's been talked about certainly for the last couple of years, but I think if you look at IE10 rolling out grid and multi-column layout, Flexbox, etc., it has the right set of standards that you can now start to move towards responsive design in an easier way to target than you were maybe, say, a year ago. And I think the differences are really going to turn out on your sites. I'll show this real quick on Microsoft.com. So let me see if I can pull that up real quick. Oh, looks like I had that in the desktop. So Microsoft.com was one of the sites that was the first to implement responsive design, at least in kind of this new modern context. And we've gotten a lot of our properties ready. If you try MSN, even if you go to the Build Windows registration page, if you noticed, it would look really, really nice in a mobile browser. But I'll just kind of take this Microsoft.com, and you can see that even the images expand dynamically all the way down to a single column layout that keeps all of the links and all of the graphics just kind of really easy to consume way as well. So this is just one of the many ways you can go cross-browser without having to spend a ton of extra time writing code and targeting specific screen resolutions as well. All right, one final thing, and that is touch. So touch is an emerging standard. We'll call that out. That's something that Microsoft has been really, really key in, just introducing that, and kind of touch is the new fast, as I mentioned. But there's some things that change your website behaviors when you move to a touch-based device. So I'm not just talking about using MS pointers or multi-gesture support or things like that. It's stuff like multi-hover menus. If you're trying with your fat finger to touch a menu and progress multiple layers deep in it, we're seeing a lot of sites that break as a result of that. So as you're thinking about your next wave design, something as simple as hover menus and helping your users get to those other deeper links in a different way, all the way to configuring your default experience. If you go to your Surface RT and you double tap, different sites will behave differently, and you can set the default on that so that users have a good experience. So with that, those are my 5 tips for cross-browser. Let me go ahead and turn it over to Jean to talk about 4 ways to light up in Windows.
Thank you. I'm on, I think. So
yes.
Good. Thank you. That was a great set of things, and I don't think I can beat games, showing demos about games. But what we're going to talk about today is, as Justin earlier said, I'm with the apps team. So it's kind of weird that I'm on stage at the IE talk. But one of the core things on Windows 8 is, I think our story on Windows 8 is not complete until we have a full apps, people, and sites that are all pinnable on the start screen story. What does that mean? That means that, and I'll actually show the start screen on this computer that we have here. You can see that we have a bunch of things on this, and they're mostly apps. You have the Bing apps here, you have the store. But as you go down the list, you'll see that we have a set of these things that are pinned on the screen that are just sites. So we have Facebook on there, Twitter on there, CNN on there. Those are just websites. So what we're going to talk about today with the remainder of the talk is how can you light up your brand on Windows 8. And the first thing I want to talk about is this thing called pinning. Again, in Windows, you can actually pin sites. You can pin people through the People app. You can even deep link or deep pin in an app. The other thing that you can pin is your website. So the really cool thing about this is, number one, as you're thinking about your web experience on Windows and as you're building the touch and the great things that Justin and Garrett talked about earlier, you should also think about how your brand looks. And the great thing in Windows is, with just 2 lines of code, you can actually have a high resolution icon on the start screen of the users. How did this work? So I'm going to borrow from Justin's technique of actually showing you demos as I talk about these things. So one of the cool things is, if you go to actually, you have pinned Atari already, haven't you?
I have pinned Build My Pin site as well.
You have pinned everything. All right, let's unpin Atari for 1 second, and I'll show you how that works. So when you're on a web page, what Atari did is actually include 2 or 3 lines of code in the header section of the site that allows people to invoke this system command called pinning on IE right at the bottom. And if you actually pin to start, you'll note that this is a high-resolution brand for the Atari Arcade. There's a title component, and when I actually choose pin, when I go back to my start screen, Atari becomes pinned. And the great thing about it is, it just looks like an app. So when the users on their start screen, all they have to do is click, and they will go directly to your website. In an attempt to embarrass Justin, let's see what happens if I click on Facebook. He's not logged in. But I was so hoping for it.
Thanks for putting me on the spot.
But that's the great thing about these pin sites. That will actually, and I'm glad you actually have pinned own because you're such a big Oprah fan. I'm just taking you to those websites directly. Switching back to
You're good.
screen. Let's do that. Another thing that we want to talk about is this idea of sharing. So in Windows, in addition to pinning, we have these things called charms. You've heard a lot about charms, right? It's the way that you can actually interact with the system and interact with the apps. So you can do searches, you can do share, you can do devices, you can do settings. And it's really powerful for apps to take advantage of. But another thing that you can actually do is you can enable shared charm behavior on your website. And the great thing about this is, number one, it's again a few lines of code. It's not a lot of work. But also, we take advantage of the Open Graph. So the way this works is, in the share charm in Internet Explorer 10, as long as you have Open Graph on your site defining a set of properties for the page that you're on, when you actually do the share motion, which is flicking from the right and choosing share, any app can actually get more detailed information. So in this case, if you look at the screen, what we have is IMDb, and what they've chosen to do is they've chosen to define a picture and a description for all of their movies. So when I'm on imdb.com and I'm looking at a movie, in this case, The Hunger Games, I can actually go to the share charm, hit share, in this case, use the Mail app to share out. And instead of just a URL, which is the default behavior, I actually get the picture and the text that goes along with the movie. So this is a really powerful way of thinking about how you want your content to be shared. And most importantly, one of the things that a lot of website owners today do is put a lot of social networks on the site. You know what I'm talking about, right? It's the Facebook like, it's the what used to be Google Plus. We all had to go and change it, or what used to be something else, and now it's Google Plus, I think. But something new comes along like Pinterest, you have to add Pinterest in there. Something comes in the Tumblr world, you have to add Tumblr. One of the great things about the share charm is, instead of worrying about all of those buttons on your website, you just have to mark your site up with Open Graph, and then let the user choose how they want to share that content out. Whether that be mail, whether that be a social network, or another app that can actually understand what you're sharing to. There are two things that I love about IE on Windows, and it's sort of not obvious that you can do this, and that's what I love about it. It's kind of a really interesting surprise that you get. And these two are the flip ahead and snap. To talk about these features, we really first need to talk about touch and how Windows does touch. There's for any Windows app, including IE, there's three main view states, right? That's number one is called the full screen, right? It's the full screen experience that you're familiar with in IE and any Windows app. Number two is the 2 stages of snap. And these 2 stages of snap is, you can actually, let's bring in one of Justin's apps. Let's see which one he has. He has a travel app on there. One of the things that you can do is, as you're doing productivity scenarios, I can actually show you the PowerPoint slide that I have, but I can also snap an app next to it. But naturally, you can also, just because Internet Explorer is an app on Windows, you can have Internet Explorer be the snapped app. The interesting thing is, right now, by default, when you do a snap, you actually get a not so great experience, because all it does is sort of show you a zoomed out view of your site. But there's an opportunity here. And what that opportunity is that you can actually do a little bit of code to understand if your site is in snap view, and change your layout. And this is going back to what Justin was talking about with the adaptive web design. As you're thinking about these experiences, think about the snap view, especially for those websites that have a meaning when they can just be snapped to the side and show the user information. You know, think about Twitter. Think about all those sites that you just leave on because it's interesting to leave on your screen. Think about how those snap view elements can actually be to your advantage, because you can make your site adaptive to the snap view and show interesting information. As we also talk about these, the final touch point that I'm going to make about your site is this new concept called flip ahead. It's a feature that's built into Windows, and what it is basically a way for you, the site owner, to show you to show the user what the next page is before they even go to that page. How does that work? Basically, there's a couple of lines of code that you can put on your site that will allow the machine, and I haven't turned this on in this one. That would allow the user to actually have a magazine-like viewing experience by just swiping to the right side of the screen to go forward and to the left side of the screen to go backward. The really cool thing about this is, if you have a lot of content that people want to just go through daily, so for like blogs or news sites, where you just want people to go next article, or if you have a photo viewing experience, which makes a lot of sense if you want to just traverse between different photos, think about utilizing flip ahead, which is basically a couple of lines of code in the header page of your header part of your page that you can define what the next page is. One caveat is that feature needs to be, it comes turned off in IE 10 by default, but if your site can light up with that feature, IE will actually show a note to the user saying, turn flip ahead on. And I think that's one of those really powerful hidden gems that you should really think about as you think about your page. And with that, I actually want to pause and invite Shailendra to the stage. He's joining us from Clipboard.com, and I really want him to take a couple of minutes to talk about a set of things that they have done on Clipboard and how they had to think about the different things. So with that, I'm gonna let you take away.
Thank you, John. Hi guys, my name is Shailendra, and I'm from Clipboard. Clipboard is a new service that allows you to save anything from the internet while preserving look, style, feel, and richness of the original item. And by default, all these clips that you make from the internet are private. You can also make them public or selectively share and collaborate with your friends through our feature called Board. And we did some great work with Microsoft in the summer on Internet Explorer 9, where we optimized Clipboard.com experience on IE9, and we were also featured in Microsoft Commercial on Internet Explorer 9. The experience was so positive that when Microsoft was doing Internet Explorer 10 on Windows 8, we wanted to take that step ahead and optimize Clipboard.com experience for Internet Explorer 10 for our users. And our experience has been really positive, and we've been able to implement all these rich features to offer our users a very rich and fluid experience for Clipboard.com on IE10. So I'm going to demo some features here. This is Clipboard.com, my account. And the main feature that I want to demo here, because Justin and John already talked about pinning. We also implemented Shared Charm, where if you are, for example, if you have a collection of recipes, you can use Shared Charm and use that Shared Charm to share those clips with your friends. But the big thing that I want to demo here is that we have made use of Touch Library of Internet Explorer 10, and the snap view is really, really powerful. And for example, if I'm on Clipboard.com here and I want to snap it while using some other application, I can do that. Hold on. I have to change the view here. And so, for example, hold on. I think I'm in a different view here. And let's say I'm using some other application. Where's the other applications here? I'll set the other applications. Right. So, for example, I'm using this Bing Travel app, and I want to also watch my clips here. So I can use this.
Yeah, you can just switch
and use this adaptive design and watch my clips here as I see the other app as well. So, and finally, I want to just say that our experience working with Internet Explorer team has been really positive. I encourage you guys to try to leverage the Touch library and other features like pinning, Shared Charm, swiping present in IE10 for your service. Thank you.
Thank you, Shailendra. Switching back, the one last thing that I want to talk about is a lot of you guys here not only have web pages, but also are building apps. Especially, I presume, after watching the keynote yesterday, when Ballmer said that you're all going to get Surfaces. So please go build apps on those Surfaces. One of the things that I would really encourage you to think about is this idea of connecting your web page to your app. And there are a couple of ways to do that in Windows and on IE. And the two that are most powerful are, number one, there is a default place for every app or every website to get connected to the web page. And this is what you might have already seen on your devices to date is the wrench icon that you have on this part of the screen. So at the bottom of every Internet Explorer, there's this wrench icon that allows you to find and view on the desktop. But if you light up the fact that you have an app that is connected to this website, it will also let you switch to that app. So let's give you a couple of examples. So if you're one of our really early partners that built an app for Windows was Index Traffic. And Index Traffic is an app basically that shows you current traffic conditions, but the really cool thing about Index is it can forecast what traffic will be at a certain hour. And what they have chosen to do is they have done two things. As I was talking, you saw that something came down at the top of the screen that says, get the Index Traffic app for Windows 8. And they have also lit up this little wrench icon. So what happens is, this wrench icon is a little smart. And number one, it will light up with a little plus to tell you that there's something interesting about this site. When you click on it, it's smart enough to realize if you have the app installed on the machine or if the app is not yet installed on the machine. So I'm going to risk and offer some sacrifices to the demo gods to make sure that this works. But what will happen is, when I click Get App for this site, I will open up the store, and I will get to the actual app listing. When I hit Install, and as the app is being installed, what happens is this wrench icon now is smart to realize that I have actually installed this app. So let me reload this page. What Index has done is, in addition to just implementing the wrench icon, they have put a little bit more code on their site to detect that you have the app installed on the system and use what we call protocol handlers. You're all familiar with the protocol handlers, like the HTTPs and the Mailtos of this world. In Windows 8, one of the coolest things that you can do is each app can register a protocol handler, and a website can actually call that protocol handler. When you do that, in this case that Index Traffic has done it, you can actually ask the user or prompt the user to switch to your app. The really cool thing about that is, if you have a website like Index Traffic, where the website is really a marketing site for people to go get the app, it's a really powerful way to remind them that they have the app installed and they should just switch to it. For other sites where the site and the app are more complementary experiences, I would encourage you to think about doing a lighter version of this and just utilizing, let me bring this to the side, instead of showing the app or prompting the user to switch the app, just implement the wrench icon, which is about 3 lines of code, and then you can let your users switch to the Index Traffic app. That would get you to your app as well. How you do this is basically 2 lines of code that you see at the bottom of this slide. The first one allows your site to connect to the app via the application ID. And number 2 is a package family name, which you can find in your Visual Studio project. And when you add those 2 lines of code, the wrench will light up. And then you can choose to take advantage of the protocol handlers if you want to do even further things like prompting them or dropping a banner on your site. So with that, I'm going to pass the torch back to Justin for a quick wrap-up.
Yep, thanks, John. So really to close here, there's 3 things that we want you to get from this presentation. One is continue to write cross-browser code. We really feel that IE10 is that tipping point that you can write both responsive code and use so many more HTML5 and CSS3 technologies. Second of all, the landscape is changing with the launch of Windows 8 and IE10. Device independence matters even more, not only in sites, but as well as apps. And then finally, be closer to your users in Windows 8. One of the things that John spoke of is that there's so many new ways to help prompt your users to have a better experience in Windows 8, to engage more, and ultimately that earns you a little bit more engagement and dollars, as well as ways to discover your app, which can also, again, be written in cross-browser code. So in terms of other ways, like I say, we kept this one pretty high level in terms of opportunities. But if you want to get deeper on the tech here, we're going to have some people. We're going to be able to talk specific code in the 30 minutes after this session. And if you haven't either seen these sessions or I think in Ray Bango's case of Don't Break the Web, that was last night, you'll be able to view those ones on Channel 9 after this. So say, final resources, I'll leave that, and thank you again.